5 to 6 years old domestic violence, mental abuse, torture, physical abuse and sadistic perversion. Summertime had come and I had been getting sick while outside playing from the poison, and on car journeys I would have to ask my mother to pull over while I was getting sick. Every week myself and my brothers would go in the car to Oranmore, which was the next town over, to this big house with a long driveway up to it. My father would tell us we had to wait in the car while he and my mother went inside to talk to the doctor. On each occasion they seemed to be with the doctor for some time as myself and my brothers waited in the car talking and laughing. Once again my mother had disappeared and my father told myself and Dean that she was in hospital and she would be home in a couple weeks. I was sad once again that my mother was gone, but I knew that she would be home in a couple weeks as my father said. While my mother was gone, my father was doing the farm work and cooking for myself and my brothers, so he was spending more time around the house than usual. My father gave myself and my brothers the dinner he prepared and left to go working again outside in the yard. After dinner myself and Dean had been in the sitting room while Declan, Colin, and Philip had been outside in the garden when my father entered the sitting room where myself and Dean had been playing heavily together. "Come here, I want you," he said while standing at the hallway door. I thought he wanted me to do something for him in the house, and I had started to follow him into the hallway. In the hallway he said, "Come on with me." He looked and sounded really nervous. I thought he was upset or something. He got to my bedroom door with me standing behind him. He pushed open the door gently and said with a really nervous voice, "Come on in here." He looked really worried about something. I didn't know what was going on. I thought he was going to cry or something, and I went into the room, stopped and turned around to see what he wanted. He pushed out the door to a close really quietly and turned and started to stare at me. He was very nervous looking. Chapter 7, Terror and the Devil's Joy. 52. As he stood there looking at me, I started to really worry by the way he was, that he was going to do something really bad to me. He took a couple steps forward. He was shaking. I got really frightened and he said, barely getting the words out, "Take off your pants and lay up on the bed." I said to myself, something really bad is going to happen to me. I was so frightened as to the way he was acting. I was never this frightened before, and I started to do what he said and pulled down my pants. I felt really bad when I had my pants down. I felt dirty once again as my father stood there staring into my eyes. He started to get a smile on his face, and when he had not moved I thought that he was going to laugh at me with my pants down and leave. As I waited for him to make a fool of me, he said, "Take them off fully and lay up on the bed like I told you." I pushed off my shoes and stepped on the ends of my pants and got fully out of them. I didn't get up on the bed like he said. I just stood there, and then he came forward and said, "Up on the bed now, good boy." I got up on the bed, sat up and put my arms on my knees, covering myself as I felt rotten being exposed. As I did, my father put his hand on my shoulder and gently pushed me back, saying, "Lay back now. That's the good boy." I laid back thinking he is going to do what he always does and start punching me between the legs. His hands started to shake. I said to myself, What is wrong with him? And again I grew very frightened at how unsettled he had got as I watched him shake more and more. He then put one hand on my leg holding it open and started to reach to his jacket pocket with the other that was now shaking really bad. He started to breathe really strangely. It was like he was finding it really hard to breathe, and as he took short breaths I started to think he was going to die, but as he reached further and further into his pocket I realized that he was nervous at something he was about to do. His hand was shaking in his pocket, and after what looked like a struggle he pulled out the pliers. I said, "He is going to pinch me with the pliers between the legs again," when he left it on the bed and reached for his pocket again. I wondered why he was going for his pocket again. He seemed to be searching really carefully for something for some time as I felt his hand shake while pushing open my leg. Again I thought, is he sick? He was taking very short breaths, but I felt that he was worried about something, the something he was about to do to me. He pulled his hand carefully out of his pocket with his palm upright and open, and I seen a lot of needles and long thin pieces of something that looked like metal. I panicked thinking, what the hell is he going to do to me? He then put the needles and bits from his palm carefully on the bed. He took his hand off my leg and started to do something with both hands that was out of my sight. I slowly closed my legs together and he gently pushed it open again and pulled his hand back and continued to do what he was doing. I again closed my legs and he pushed them open, holding it down. He started to do something with the other hand and seemed to be struggling at what he was doing while taking deep breaths and blowing out. Chapter 7, Terror and the Devil's Joy. 53. Heavily. He continued to take his hand off my leg for brief moments to where his other hand had been and back again to hold my legs open. After some time, which seemed like forever, my father had struggled at what he was doing. He raised his right hand into sight and he had a needle in between the jaws of the pliers. He held it there and looked between my legs. I was motionless. He looked to be in deep thought. I then knew that he was going to put the needle in me. He started to really concentrate and try to calm down the shake in his hands, while I thought maybe he is thinking about not doing it. He then put his right hand forward and the needle that was being held by the pliers disappeared out of sight. I braced myself. I could barely breathe as I knew he was going to put the needle in me. He then leaned his head in close and started to look closely between my legs. He put his hand all the way in, and he started to touch and feel around that area. I felt rotten as he felt around, but at this stage I fully knew that he was trying to look for the place where he would stick the needle in me. As he was doing so, he grew more bothered, panting and breathing heavy while trying to concentrate as he looked carefully between my legs. I started to move about a bit as his hand that seemed to brush gently over the skin between my legs started to tickle me. "Stay steady," he said silently while heavily concentrated on what he was doing. I couldn't stay still as it was tickling a lot, but I tried as hard as I could not to move, as this is what was asked of me. As my body shook, he kept telling me to stay still as he seemed desperate for me to stop and started to push down on my hip to prevent me from shaking. After some time of this struggle between the two of us, he pushed my leg up towards my stomach and held it there, and as he looked between my legs, that pleasured look came on his face and he looked up and stared into my eyes. When I seen that look, I knew it was about to happen. "Hold still now," he said, looking to be concentrating but with a pleasured smile on his face. He pushed tightly between my legs with his left hand. I braced myself and held my breath. He started to push the needle in me really slowly. I took a breath in and then my head and shoulders lifted up towards my stomach and I let out a shout. The pain was horrendous. He put his left hand on my shoulder and started to push me back down on the bed while pushing the needle in. I held my breath again as he pushed the needle in further. The pain was unbearable, and when my father had pushed me back to a lying down position and stopped pushing the needle in, I exhaled slowly. I had passed out and woke to feeling a tremendous pain between my legs. It felt like that I had been pricked inside me by a lot of needles that I now knew that he had put inside me. But I had also woke to being what felt like a tickle and some pain with some pressure on my bum from my father's hand, and I seen that a couple bits of the finger-long steel had been in his other hand. While I was passed out, my father had put some of the lengths of steel inside my bum. Chapter 7: Terror and the Devil's Joy. 54. I moved a little and the pain was out of this world, and I started to really worry about what he had done to me and panicked in despair, shouting, "What have you done to me? Take them out. Get them out. Ah, Jesus, get them out of me!" I shouted in a panic state. It was a nightmare. I was in a world of despair when he said with a worried face, "Don't worry, I'll take them out later. Take them out now." Oh, Jesus. I could feel the blood rush into my face as I shouted and tried to deal with the pain. "You're going to have to get up and go into the sitting room and sit down," he said, "and I'll take them out later." He had said it as if I was complaining about nothing. "Take them out. Take them out." I shouted when he forcefully said, "Will you stop? I'll fucking take them out later, but first you have to go out to the sitting room and sit down." I knew he would not help me until I had done what he asked of me. I started to try and roll onto my side. I had only slightly moved and I couldn't bear the pain, and I stopped and the pain exacerbated as I rolled back. I tried the same again and again with the same result. I couldn't get off the bed, the pain was so bad. I had either passed out on attempt or had no recollection of how I got off the bed, but found myself a couple steps inside the sitting room with my father having his hands on me. I was standing still in horrific pain. I felt all the needles inside of me between my legs. I was taking short breaths. I couldn't believe what I was going through, what I was in. It was a nightmare. From behind me my father whispered, "Come on, move on," while slightly nudging me forward with his hand. I seen Dean away from me doing something by the side of the couch. I tried to take a step forward slowly without shouting in pain. I knew I had to be quiet and not let Dean see what was going on. I moved and the pain was too unbearable, and I stopped and said to myself, "I can't do this." And I was worrying that this nightmare wasn't going to end until I did what my father wanted, and again I was worrying in despair that my father was never going to take the needles out, and I was never getting out of this, and even at the young age of 5 I worried about what the needles was doing to my insides. I hesitated for some time when my father whispered in my ear, "If you don't go over there and sit down, I'll kill your mother." Now my father had me where he wanted me. He knew I probably would go through with it, knowing that I would not want my mother to die. I had fallen for his manipulation, and I tried to pick up the courage to see it out and prevent my mother's life from being taken by my father. I inhaled, held my breath, and started to walk. As I walked, I tried to blank my mind from the pain and of all thought, just to follow it through. I had managed to do this on the walk to the couch where I was to sit on the order from my father. I could still feel awful pain, but this had worked to an extent and got me through a couple steps from the couch. Dean had turned around from what he was doing to straight away. Chapter 7: Terror and the Devil's Joy. 55. See from the expression on my face and my slow movement as I took the last step to the couch that there was something awful wrong with me. As I knew that on the orders of my father that I had to sit on the couch, and thought it would be less horrific if I just leaned on the arm of the chair, having to not fully bend down and lessen the cruel pain, with the hope my father would accept this to be good enough and might meet his needs. I put my right hand on the arm of the couch and tried to turn around slowly. As I did, a very worried look grew on Declan's face. He then made an attempt to talk and muttered something. It was something about what he was doing. I knew he wanted me to join him in what he was doing to the left. I was hoping he wouldn't ask me what was wrong, as I thought if he did and I had to tell him, then my father would kill my mother. I knew that my mother had been in hospital, but I knew that he would wait for her to come home and then kill her, if I didn't do what he wanted. When I didn't reply to Dean, he put on a worried face again and looked down at the way I was moving. I kept turning in pain, and Dean then looked into my eyes. He seen the look of distress in my face as I tried to put up with the pain, and then he himself got very distressed looking. I could tell that he knew that something was very wrong. It looked like he was very worried for me and had felt sorry for whatever I was going through. I hoped he would not ask what was wrong when he eventually turned to what he had been doing. I looked across the room to see my father sitting on the edge of the couch with his hands on his knees, with a huge pleasured look on his face. His eyes were unusually wide open and he was staring into my face. I knew that he was hugely enjoying what was going on, seeing me suffer through his sick, twisted ordeal. I had been fully turned around and I knew my father was waiting for me to sit down. I knew that I had to follow through on in orders, so I put my arms behind me and onto the arm of the couch as to let my bum back slowly to lessen the pain of the needles that had been inserted in the end of my bum. Hoping this would be enough to please my father, as he had asked me to sit down, I slowly started to let myself back to rest my bum up against the arm of the couch as to not fully sit down. I braced myself for the pain and drew in my breath and held it. As I did, I looked to my father and seen that he was engrossed in what was happening, with pleasure in his face as he waited with anticipation for me to sit. I got my bum resting on the arm of the couch, but I still had my arms behind me pushing back to lessen the pain and not letting my bum take all the weight of my body. While still looking at my father, he had not noticed that most of the pressure had been taken by my arms pushing back against the couch, and he sat there looking overjoyed at the tremendous pain I was in. He sat there engrossed in it all for some time as I prayed he wouldn't make me fully sit down on the couch. I either passed out or have no recollection, but found myself back lying on the bed in a very worried state, very emotional, crying, "Get them out," to my father, who was looking and Chapter 7, Terror. And the Devil's Joy. 56. Acting extremely worried, he was so worried I started to panic that my body was in major trouble and my father can't get the needles out that felt way inside me. He was in a major panic. He was breathing really heavy again. I shouted, "Get them out. Get them out." He said, "I'll get them out." As he looked between my legs, he looked so confused, panicking, breathing like crazy. He didn't know what to do. I was worried. I then passed out. I have no recollection of the rest of the day. Chapter 8, The Scythe, the Devil, and the Field. 57. Chapter 8. The Scythe, the Devil, and the Field. Age: 5 to 6 years old. Threats and abandonment into remote fields overnight with impossible tasks to do, and the constant fear of being killed. My father had been taking advantage of my mother's absence and laid heavily on me with his twisted ways. He again came into my room in the middle of the night, but on this occasion he had deliberately woke me up this time. I got a bit frightened as I wasn't sure what was going on, as this went against what he had done on all the other nights. He said in a low tone, "Put on your clothes, we are going." Still frightened, I got out of the bed and put on my clothes, as he stood there waiting. I thought to myself, he is not angry and he has not put his hands on me, thinking I'm getting off lightly this time, but where are we going? When I was dressed he said, "Come on," and I followed him out of the room. He walked quietly without saying a word through the house as I also quietly followed. When we got out of the house he told me to get in the car and wait there as he walked in the direction of the sheds. I got in the back of the car and closed the door thinking, what's going on? What's going to happen? Shortly my father appeared close to the car and with him he held the scythe in his hands. My father used this for clearing bushes. It was a long handle with a long sharp blade at the ending. I had seen my father use this on a number of occasions and I said to myself, he is going working, and he is bringing me with him. Although I was a little frightened at the sight of the long blade, it didn't enter my mind that my father was going to do something to me with the blade, as I was always a bit frightened at the sight of the blade anytime my father used it previously to this. He put the scythe in the boot and got in the car. He then started the engine and slowly reversed out the driveway. He went in the direction of where he had landed, away from the house. I was a little relaxed, thinking that I'm not going to get a beating from my father as he has some work to do and he is just bringing me along for the spin. As he drove along he was very quiet and things started to feel a bit sneaky as I thought to when he placed the scythe in the back of the car, remembering that things seemed a bit. Chapter 8, The Scythe, the Devil, and the Field. 58. Strange in that short time before the journey began and I started to think, my father could be up to something different than just going working, but telling myself that it's more than likely he just has some work to do. Convincing myself of this, my mind relaxed again. I remember this journey as myself and my brothers had went there with my father on a lot of occasions. We got to where my father had usually parked the car or the tractor and stopped there. He said, "Come on," as he got out of the car, and I quickly followed. He went to the back of the car and opened the boot as I stood beside it. He took the side out and closed the boot after him. I hoped the work would not take too long and I could go home and back to bed. He walked to the gate, opened it, saying, "Come on," and I followed. We walked through the field and got to the next gate where he opened it, saying, "Go on, get in there." I walked in before him and looked back as he again said, "Go on, get in there, stay going." I got frightened as his tone had changed and he now sounded a little angry. As I walked through the field, he closely followed behind, and I started to think that we are not going working. He has brought me here to kill me. I said to myself that he is just going to swing the scythe from behind me and cut my head off with it. I thought this was it. This is where my life is going to end. I looked behind to see if he had the scythe raised and in the position to swing with it, when he said to me, "Keep going and don't be looking behind you." I kept walking, thinking now I won't see it coming and I won't have any chance of running. I was feeling sad now as I knew that I couldn't prevent it and my life was now going to end. I tried to look a bit to the left in an attempt to again see if he was going to swing the scythe, but I did not turn around fully as he had warned me not to. As I walked, knowing that my life was going to be now over, I said to myself, "I'm not going to try and look around again, and I'm going to show my father that I'm not afraid of him ending my life." So I continued walking, and although I was so frightened, I was hoping that he thought that it wasn't bothering me and that I didn't care that he was going to end it all. I hoped that he might change his mind, but I knew how evil he was and it was a very small chance he would not follow through. I was hoping, but the sadness of my life ending overwhelmed me as I walked. I was just waiting for it to happen. All of a sudden he said, "Stop." I could not believe it and felt instant relief as I turned and looked to him. He looked at me. His look was very strange and the sadness again came over me as I said to myself, "He is just going to do it here where I can see him doing it." When he said to me, "You are to clear all of these bushes with the scythe like I showed you before you can come home. I'll pick you up in the morning." I could not believe that I wasn't going to die. Straight away I hoped he didn't know what I thought was going to happen to me, and I wanted to show him that I had not been frightened, so I reached for the scythe, saying, "Where will I start, and can you show me again how to use it?" He handed me the scythe, saying, "You should know how to use it," and I replied, "I don't know what to do." "What will I do?" And he took it from me, walked over to the bushes as I followed quickly, and he swiped the scythe at the bottom of the bushes, taking 2 to 3 quick swipes, and turned, placing the scythe in my hands, saying, "Now." Chapter 8: The Scythe, the Devil, and the Field. 59. That's how you use it. Although it was dark, I could see the grin on his face as he turned and walked away. I stood there thinking I'm not going to be able to do this. The scythe was so heavy and awkward. Although it was the middle of the night, I didn't question why I had to work during the night and not the day like always. This had been the first time I was put working in the night, but I just thought that the work just had to be done and I had to do it as my father would have other work to do himself. So I tried to lift the scythe and get to work. It was very heavy and I got anxious about the possibility of hurting myself with it. I thought I was going to cut my foot off. But I knew I needed to keep trying and get the work done before my father came back in the morning. I tried again and got the blade to the bushes, barely with the blade off the ground. I had not got the strength to swipe it at the bushes like my father showed me. I tried several times, always with the same result, and not having the strength to do it, always panicking I was going to do myself harm with the blade, and I just gave up, saying, "Oh, don't care what my father says, I just can't do it." So I let the scythe go with relief, knowing I was only going to hurt myself with it if I had kept trying. I thought, I'll go over to the wall and sit down. I felt restless as I got there and started to walk from one corner of the field to the other. I recalled my father telling me that he wouldn't be collecting me until the morning, and I knew I probably had a lot of time left in the field until then. As I walked up and down the field, I wondered if my father was going to be mad that I didn't do the work for him, but I kept telling myself that it wasn't possible for me to be able to do what my father showed, and I began not to care, thinking, what am I going to do now until the morning arrives, and kept walking in the field. And I got a slight feeling that my father left me here on purpose, and thinking this, I said, if he did, he probably won't care that I had no work done. Now I wasn't sure why my father had taken me out of the house in the middle of the night and brought me here, but I knew I had a long wait until he came back for me. Time went so slow until it started to get bright. Now, with some relief seeing that it was getting bright, I said, he will be here soon. But it took some time before my father had arrived, and I was feeling very tired, and I was never as happy to see my father appear. I stood there wondering what he was going to do when he sees that I had no work done, when he simply called me from a distance, saying, "Come on. We're going home." My father seemed to be in a hurry to get me home before my brothers had seen that I had been missing from the house, so he said, "Get the scythe quick and we go." I was so relieved that I was going home and there was nothing said about the work, so I quickly ran over, picking it up, and followed him through the field and into the car and made the journey back to the house, relieved it was over. This continued. My father would take me out of my bed in the middle of the night and just kept leaving me in the same field with the same orders. I had never done any work on any of the nights, and my father had never complained about this. Once again my father had woke me in the night and we went on the usual journey, but this time he kept driving and had not stopped at his land. I got confused and I could not think. Chapter 8: The Scythe, the Devil, and the Field. 60. Of any reason why my father had driven past and kept going. We had been traveling now for about an hour, and I was still confused as to what was going on and where he was taking me. I then fell asleep, and sometime later I woke to my father carrying me in his arms through what seemed to be a field of bushes. Bushes surrounded us as my father carried me, and shortly we got to where there was a small area of bushes that had been flattened. My father stopped here and quickly put me standing on my feet. At this stage it had got somewhat bright, as it was the summer time, and I could see that I was in the middle of a place surrounded in bushes, and it was not familiar to any place I had seen before. Laying on the ground I could see the scythe. My father then picked it up and put it in my hands and said, "You're here until 6 o'clock tomorrow evening. "You won't be picked up until then," he said, "so you have all this to clear before then," and he turned and walked away. I stood there with the scythe in my hands, shocked that I was not going to be going home until tomorrow evening. On all the other occasions my father had picked me up in the morning, but this time I was in an unfamiliar place far away, and I knew that it was going to be a long time before I got out of there. I wondered where I was as I stood there, still shocked and now a little angry and anxious, thinking what I was going to do until tomorrow evening when my father was to pick me up. Again, not knowing if my father was going to be angry or not if I had no work done when he arrived. I thought, will I cut some bushes? I thought about this for some time and still didn't know what to do, but then I became very bored and decided to try and work to pass the time, but I knew from the other nights that it would be very difficult and dangerous for me to work the scythe, but I knew I had to pass the time somehow. I tried, and after some time with great difficulty I managed to cut a very small proportion of bushes. It was such a small amount that I knew that it would not be even visible to my father, and I then gave up. I stood there again, not knowing what to do. I became curious as to where I was, and I thought, will I try and see if I can get out of this unfamiliar place and see if I recognized where I was. I thought of the long journey it took to get here, and I had a feeling I was in a place I would not recognize outside the surrounding bushes, and therefore decided to stay put, also knowing that I might not be able to find my way back to where I was meant to be. Hours went by like this, thinking, will I do some more work or will I chance getting out of the bushes and see where I was? It was now daylight and I started to get hungry, worried because my father had left me here without any food. Some hours had passed like this, confused, bored, and very hungry. I had no idea of the time I had left, but I knew it was far from the evening. As I took off my jumper, I had an idea that with the heat starting that it was only the beginning of the day. I done some more work and then sat down on the ground for a rest, but I got up again after a short time to work again to keep my mind off wanting some food. Time went slow and it felt like I was there forever. Out of boredom, not caring if I got lost, I decided I would now go through the bushes and see what was outside of it. I walked 5 to 6 steps through the bushes before I got frightened, thinking if I keep going I might not be able to find my way back, so I turned around and made the steps back into where I had been. Chapter 8: The Scythe, the Devil, and the Field. 61. The day went on and I kept doing work from time to time, as I could not rest for long as I kept thinking about food. It became very warm and it was difficult to stay working, so I had no choice but to sit and go through the thought of eating. More hours went by and I had been standing there with the scythe in my hands when my father came through the bushes in a hurry. He didn't look to see if I had any of the work done. He just quickly said, "It's 6 o'clock. Come on, and we go." I started to walk carrying the scythe when he angrily took it from me and threw it quickly to the ground. As we hurried through the bushes, he picked me up and told me to close my eyes and not to open them until he said so. I felt him lay me down into the seat of the car. Still with my eyes closed, I had fallen asleep. I have no recollection of getting home or how I felt after the ordeal. These past days and nights had taken a lot out of me, and I must have slept a lot as I woke to be drowning in water in the dark. My head was under water. I frantically tried to get my head up for air, succeeding, but I panicked thinking I was going to go under and die. I was swinging my hands trying to stay up. It was very dark and the water seemed to be pulling me backwards. I looked back to see what was behind me, and all I could see was darkness, and I panicked again thinking I was going to be pulled into the darkness and never come back. As the water pushed and pulled, I couldn't help but keep looking back to see how far I was away from the darkness. I struggled and struggled to stay afloat, and then got some confidence to try and go forward as I had now looked in front of me and seen lights and a wall and said it's not too far away to safety. As I tried, the water pulled me back and my head went under. Coming back up and trying to catch my breath, I then seen my father in the water in front of me. I don't know if he had taken me out of the water then or if he had watched me struggle for longer, but again my father had brought me, as I realized today, a good distance from the home to observe the suffering of his son. In the coming days my father said to myself and Dean that we were to come with him, that we were going to pick up our mother and bring her home from the hospital. I was glad to hear that my mother was coming home, but I was very depressed and sad. On the journey to the hospital I didn't play or talk to Dean in the back of the car. I was very fed up. Before we reached the hospital I hoped that my mother would not notice that I was sad, but I wasn't overly worried if she did. I felt like I just didn't care anymore. As we drove in the driveway of the hospital I was thinking, it's good that my mother is coming home, and I started to try and cheer up a little, but I couldn't manage it. What my father had done to me broke my spirit. We pulled up outside the big building and waited for our mother to come out. Again I tried to brush aside the sadness and put a smile on my face, but I didn't succeed. I was looking down at the ground when I heard the passenger door open. It was my mother. I was glad to see that it was her, but all I could think about was trying not to look sad. She had got in and took a quick look in at myself and Dean in the back, and then turned back as my father proceeded to drive away from the hospital. Chapter 8: The Scythe, the Devil, and the Field. 62. My mother looked tired and did not speak or ask any questions on the way home. I was glad she didn't see how sad I had been. At home after the journey back from the hospital, everyone was sitting on the couch and in great form that our mother was back home. I had been walking from the sitting room to my bedroom and back in an attempt to avoid being in constant sight of my mother. I had been still very down in myself and didn't want her to notice, as she might start to question the form I had been in. The words of my father telling me he would kill my mother was ringing in my mind, and I thought if I had to tell my mother what my father did to me, he would kill her. I walked from the sitting room to my bedroom and back many times, making an appearance at the sitting room door in the view of my mother and going again, not to give her enough time to see the sadness in my face. She was so happy being home to her sons and was busy answering questions that my brothers were asking her about her stay in hospital that fortunately she didn't notice my form. As I walked up and down the hallway, it weighed so heavily on my mind what my father had done to me in the nightmare he had put me through that only the devil could do something like that, and I convinced myself that my father was the devil. Thinking this way frightened me, and I wanted to be sure, and when I got from my room to the sitting room door I took a couple steps in and started to look down at my father's feet where he sat on the couch beside my brother's. I wanted to see if he had hoofs like the devil. As I looked I wondered why I couldn't see hoofs, as I was convinced I was looking at the feet of the devil. I kept looking and looking, and I then looked up to see my father looking straight at me, grinning like crazy. He could see what he had done to me really disturbed me, and this had pleasured him immensely. I didn't see the hoofs, but that didn't stop me from thinking he was the devil. To me he had always been the evil man that was in charge of me, my mother and brothers, but now I was convinced that the devil himself was living with us. This frightened me, as I thought now there would be no getting away from the devil and we would be under his leash forever. Later in life, when myself and my brother discussed how sick and twisted our father was, he had said to me, "There is a picture at home, and you can see in the picture he looks really evil in it." I had seen this picture many times, and this picture had been taken on the day my mother came home from hospital, and in the picture my father had been sitting in the same position on the couch where I was looking to him and down at his feet. Chapter 9. Safe Days and Horror Nights. 63. Chapter 9. Safe Days and Horror Nights. Age, 5 to 6 years old, brought to strangers' homes to protect from abuse, but nightly beatings and torture continued. As we got more into the summer, myself and my brothers were making the most of our time being off school by playing around the house. We had been told by our father that we would be going to the bog in the morning to get the turf ready to bring home when the winter came. I had never been to the bog before and didn't know what to expect. Declan, Colin and Philip had been the previous year and talked all evening about how much they hated the bog. In the morning we all hit off for the bog. On the journey there my brothers weren't talking. I knew that they were dreading the day in the bog. When we arrived, my father told us all to get out and follow him into the bog, and said to my mother to bring the bottled tea into the bog and leave it under the sun so it would stay warm. My father started to tell my brothers what to do and showed Dean what to do, as it was his first time in the bog. As I waited to receive orders from my father what to do, my mother said, "Maurice, you stand over there beside the bottles of tea and watch. You are too young to be in the bog working." When my father looked up at her and looked to be very frustrated with her, I went on my mother's orders and walked back to where the bottles of tea had been. I was really happy that my mother said I didn't have to work, and I felt very thankful to her for preventing me from having to work, but I knew that my father wasn't happy with my mother's decision. As I stood there and everyone was working, my father kept looking up at me with an angry face. I knew he was angry that I wasn't working. After some time he looked up at me and said, "Come over here." I went over and he started telling me what to do. I didn't understand what he was showing me. He then went over and started working on another piece of the bog. I looked to my mother because I had not understood my mother's orders on what to do with the sods of turf. She looked at me and she seemed very nervous looking. She didn't want me working but was afraid to go against my father and tell me to stop. Chapter 9. Safe Days and Horror Nights. 64. I stood there not knowing what to do and got very nervous thinking he is going to go mad when he sees me not working, so I looked over at the rest of my brothers to see what they had been doing with the intention of copying them. As I looked at what my brothers were doing, I could still not understand what to do with the sods. In an attempt to stop my father from going mad, I just started to move the sods around. My father had been keeping a close eye on me, and when he seen that I was doing things wrong, he started shouting and came over to me quickly, grabbed me by the arm and started shaking me. He was very angry, shouting, "Look what you are doing. Sure, that's fucking wrong." He was frothing at the mouth with temper. My mother then came over and fearfully said, "Go on over there, Maurice," and I started to walk back towards the bottles of tea. As I did, my father was angrily saying to my mother that I was useless, saying, "Do you see what he was doing? Sure, it's all wrong what he is doing, fuck sake," and walked in temper over to where he was. I stood there looking straight at my father. I felt a lot of anger towards him. The work continued, and after some time of my father being quiet, he started shouting up at me. He was shouting all sorts, and from time to time he would tell me to go working, but I had fully withdrawn from my father and just stood there refusing to do anything, which made him more angry. My father seemed very frustrated with me, and I could see from my mother's face that she felt real bad at the way my father was treating me. I didn't do anything for my father the rest of that day in the bog. Some days after the bog, I recall someone telling me that I was going to live somewhere else with a woman, and that my mother would be coming to see me all of the time, and that it was going to be for the best. I felt really sad that I wasn't going to be living with my mother and brothers anymore, but I had taken in what had been said, that it was going to be for the best. The bigger part of me didn't want to go and be without my mother and brothers. I don't recall much of the day that I was leaving for my new home. I remember that I had been really sad thinking of leaving my mother and brothers, and I had refused to go. I recall some people telling me that I had to go, and sometime later I had woke to being very drowsy on a couch in a strange house. I could barely keep my eyes open and fell back to sleep, to awaken again still feeling drowsy. I tried to stay awake. I wanted to know where I was. I could hear someone somewhere in the house doing something as I tried to keep my eyes open. I fell asleep a number of times and had woken to the same noise of someone doing something in the house. After some time I was able to stay awake, but I felt lifeless. I wasn't able to get off the couch. I started to look around and wondered, where am I and how long have I been and what am I doing here? I was very confused as to why I had woken on the couch in this house I didn't recognize. The noise continued, and then it stopped and an old woman appeared in front of me. She had come from around the back of the couch that I had been laying on. Chapter 9: Safe Days and Horror Nights. 65. She looked at me carefully for some seconds and walked away again. I heard noise again. I realized that it was the old woman that was making the noise. She is probably cooking, I thought. I wasn't able to get off the couch, and I wanted the old woman to appear again in the hope she would tell me where I was and end the confusion that was overwhelming me. She appeared again after some time and had been carefully looking at me. I was too drowsy to talk and had said nothing when she went off again. Why didn't she say anything? I thought, and had come again to be carefully looking at me. As a result of the old woman carefully looking at me and not talking, I began to think she was angry at me and started to wonder what I might have done. She appeared on several occasions in the same fashion, and each time I said to myself, she looks like she is mad at me. I thought, who is she and does she live here by herself? After a long time laying on the couch in confusion as to where I was, I tried to get off the couch and go and see could I get any understanding of where I was and why I woke up in this strange place. I made an attempt to get off the couch and felt like I was about to faint and lay back again. I made several attempts, struggling each time to get off the couch. Eventually I rolled off the couch and got on my feet on the ground. I decided to walk away from the noise in the direction of where I seen a lot of light. I could barely lift my legs. I thought I would fall to the ground as I dragged my feet along. I really wanted to get to where the light was in the hope of recognizing something from outside. It took some time as I was very slow on my feet. I was still very drowsy. As I walked around the corner, I seen a long line of cabinets all along the wall on the lead up to what was now in my view a big window. I thought I would never get to the window. When I finally got there, the window I could barely see out, and took a few steps back and tried to go on my tiptoes in the hope of seeing out. I found it really difficult to go on my tiptoes as I was still drowsy, but I managed it and got to see a bit out the window. I seen a big plant that had been very close to the window. I wasn't satisfied as I wanted to see further and try to see if I recognized something from past the plant. I tried to get higher on my toes to see past, but it was very difficult to manage this feat as I was very unbalanced and still drowsy. After eventually reaching as high as I could achieve, I didn't see any further and gave up. I wanted to go to another window, but I didn't want to see the old woman again and decided to wait for the noise to stop, thinking with the noise stopped she had left the house. As I eagerly waited, I started to look to the long cabinet that had lots and lots of trophies inside. I wondered who they were belonged to. Were they belonged to the man of the house or the old woman's son? I questioned myself. I walked up and down trying to pass the time until I heard the noise from within the house disappear. I didn't want to turn around to maybe see the old woman standing there again looking at me, so I stayed facing the cabinet, walking left to right. It felt like I had been doing this for a. Chapter 9: Safe Days and Horror Nights. 66. Very long time when to my great delight I heard from behind me my mother's voice calling out, "Maurice, how are you?" "I'm okay," I replied, and she bent down and caught my hand saying, "How are you getting on?" I said, "Okay," with sadness in my voice. My mother then said, "Wait here for a few minutes and I'll be back to you," and left. I knew now that I had been sent away to live with this old woman. I started to hear a lot of talk from my mother and the old woman from around the corner. I was hoping that they would stop talking and my mother could come back to me. It felt like I was waiting forever. I have no recollection after that, but found myself back with my mother and brothers and back in the hands of my evil father. For the rest of the summer my mother was bringing me to the boy's house who was in my class and who I had been traveling with to school with, driven by his mother. My mother was getting me away from my father any chance she could get, and I had been brought to this boy's house almost every day. But at night time my father continued to beat and torture me in my room. I had really enjoyed being in the boys' house all of those days and was glad to find myself back with the rest of my friends in school now that the summer was over. Enjoying my time there and was getting on really well. Chapter 10, Red Hot Poker Anyone? 67. Chapter 10, Red Hot Poker Anyone? Age, 5 to 6 years old, brought to strangers' homes to protect from abuse, but nightly beatings and torture continued. On the weekend towards evening my mother had to go into the city to get the shopping and said to my father, "I'll bring Maurice with me," when he said, "He'll stay at home here. He is too young to be traveling in the car with just yourself. He could cause you to have an accident and kill the two of ye." I could tell by my mother's face that she didn't like me being left there with my father. It unnerved her, but she knew not to go against my father's decision and hit off for the city. When she had been gone, our father said to us that we had to sit there and be quiet while our mother was gone. We sat on the couch and I had been a little nervous about being there as I recalled my father putting the needles in me when my mother had been away in hospital, but I settled down as my father had not started to shout at me and my brothers. He was unusually quiet and it felt like that he was minding us. He put turf in the fire and sat on the ledge just to the right of the fire. He took up the poker and started to poke the fire with his back to us. He sat there for some time with the poker in his hand that he was holding in over the fire and slightly moving it from time to time and seemed to be just staring into the fire. He didn't seem to bother with us at all. I was now always wary of my father at all times, but he was so quiet I did think to myself, is he actually minding us? But started to also think to myself, why is he so quiet with his back to us? Is he up to something? I was confused as to whether he was just looking after us or whether he was going to do something to us, which led me to be indecisive of the two. We had all been dead quiet when all of a sudden he turned to us, raising the poker with a cheeky smile on his face. Quickly I wondered what was going on. He was not in a rage with the poker held but grinning from ear to ear. Chapter 10, Red Hot Poker Anyone? 68. He started to look me in the eyes. Grinning, he came towards me slowly, bending down and got right close to me and paused. I thought, what's going on? Is he going to hit me? This is strange. What is he going to do? He then started to come closer, really slowly, staring in my eyes. He was getting so close I pushed back into the couch. What is he going to do? I thought as I sunk back as far as I could. He lifted the poker and put it close to my face. I could feel burning heat in my face coming from the poker. I tried to push my head further back to get away from burning heat, and as I did, the poker followed. I could feel my skin burning and I thought my eyes were going to go on fire, and I started to sink down into the bottom of the couch to get my face away, but the poker still followed. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I could not take the heat any longer, and out of desperation I tried to push the poker away from my face. I had reached forward as far as I could as to avoid pushing on the red-hot tip of the poker. Reaching to halfway down on the poker, I quickly pushed it away, burning the palm of my hand. He moved it close to my face again. He was laughing like crazy, again not able to take the heat. I pushed at it again with the same result, burning my hand. My father had left the poker resting in the fire for so long that the heat had traveled all the way down to the handle. There was nothing I could do only to receive burns to my hand by pushing at the poker in an attempt to avoid it resulting in my eye. I thought he would never stop. My heart was racing and my palm was badly burned. The pain was absurd, but I didn't let up in my quest to get free and kept pushing the poker away. Watching me panic and in awful pain, my father continued as he was thoroughly enjoying seeing me this way. Thinking he would never back off, I stopped pushing at the poker. I had given up and got extremely angry and fed up. Fed up and given up, I decided to let him do whatever he wanted to me and left my hand down at my side. I was feeling awful burning to my hand, but I quickly forgot when my father put the poker in closer to my face. Again the burning feeling on my face began. It was awful, and I decided to try and stick it out without defending and with the intention to try and show him that it wasn't bothering me. There was no other way left. Saying to myself, I won't give in no matter what. My eyes were burning like mad. I thought my eyes and skin were on fire. I never felt anything like it. Initially I was trying to show no emotion in my face and using determination to help me through, but I was getting through on pure anger alone. Now my father wasn't getting what he wanted and pulled back looking angry. My eyes were still burning like crazy, but I sat there motionless as if I wasn't feeling any pain. I thought, is this working? Will he go away? Chapter 10, Red Hot Poker. Anyone? 69. My eyes were burning so bad I said to myself, I don't care if he does something else to me as long as he stays away, until the burning within my eyes went away. He was very angry looking, and I started saying to myself, please, please stay away until the burning goes, then you can do what you want. He had stayed away long enough and my eyes and skin started to cool down, and with this I started to feel the burn from the palm of my hand, and while concentrating on that pain I had been looking down at my hand. My father had noticed that I was bothered and in pain with my hand, and a big smile came on his face, looked me in the eyes, and then, unknown to me, he had slowly put the hot poker close to my wrist, looked down and up again to be staring directly face to face, staring in my eyes. Now with that grin on his face again, I knew he was going to do something, but I wasn't too worried as the poker had been away from my face. All I could think about was the relief of my eyes and skin when he placed the poker on the top of my palm and pushed down on it, holding it while it burned into me. I shouted, "Aw! You bastard!" "Aw!" pulling my badly burned hand away. The pain was horrendous. I grabbed around my wrist with my other hand, shouting in pain. My brothers were stuck to the couch in fear. I couldn't believe that something could be so painful, and while still shouting in pain, holding my hand. To my disbelief, he put the poker to my hand again. I pulled my hand away and he followed with the poker and touched it on my skin again. I went into shock, panicking, saying to myself, he's not going to stop. What the hell am I to do? As fast as I could pull my hand away, he replied by being just as quick, making contact with my hand every time. He was grinning like crazy. After some time of this struggle, my father had burned my hand several times, and I decided to put them behind my back in the hope he would stop. As I did, he looked angry again, and I felt uneasy as I had left my face exposed to the poker again. He then grinned at me and walked off into the kitchen. I brought my hands back around from the back of the couch and looked at the burns. The pain was absurd. I glanced over at my brothers. They all seemed to be very distressed looking. I sat there for a long time before the pain subsided. We were all still in shock on the couch when our mother got home. I heard the car pull up outside, and as she came in the kitchen I heard my father greeted. He said, "Come in here and see what this fool done to himself." "Who?" said my mother. "That Maurice burned himself with the poker," replied my father. She entered the room and came straight over, and I had put my hand down to the side. "Did you burn yourself, Maurice?" said my mother, looking worried. Feeling very withdrawn, I barely got the word out, but I knew I had to answer my mother and hope she didn't notice why I was withdrawn from everyone. "Yeah, I did," I muttered to her. "Show me," she said, and I slowly lifted my hand up, keeping it at a distance, hoping she wouldn't see how bad it was and then leave without asking questions. "Oh, Jesus! That looks really bad," she said, bending down to get a closer look. Chapter 10, Red Hot Poker. Anyone? 70. "Are you all right? Did you put it under the tap?" she said when from behind my father said, "I left the tap running there for him and sure he went away from it. What more could I do with him?" he said with a cheeky smile on his face. "Come on again and I'll run it under the tap," she said. "Isn't he all right? Wasn't it under long enough?" with some anger in his voice to get his way, but my mother insisted and brought me to the tap. My mother ran my hand under the water and had not twigged anything. This continued every time my mother had been gone shopping, but with my father smartly just touching off me with the hot poker and not leaving a noticeable burn. On the weekend again, while eating dinner, my mother told us that she was going to the city to do the shopping, and from across the table I saw my father grinning. I knew what the grin meant, and I said to myself, "I don't want to go through this anymore," and asked my mother could I go with her. "Sir, you can," she said, glancing at my father to see his reaction. "No. He can't go with you," my father said. "I told you before, he'll cause an accident if he goes with you, killing yourselves or killing someone else." I was disappointed, looking to my mother, who also looking disappointed that she had failed in her attempt to bring me with her. She knew I really wanted to go and wouldn't have said no if my father had not been there. I knew not to ask again. My father's answer was fixed, and decided quickly to go and hide in the car in an attempt to overthrow my father's answer. I rushed my dinner and went outside, opened the back door of the car and got in. I wondered would I be allowed to go when my mother and father sees me in the car, but I quickly interpreted the answer and decided to hide behind the passenger seat. I went down as far as I could go, crawled behind the seat. I wondered would I get away with it, would I be seen by my father or mother? After some time I heard my mother saying, "Where is Maurice?" I thought my plan didn't work. I had hoped that my mother would have not noticed I was missing, got in the car and proceed to the city with me hiding in the back. I wonder where he is. I heard her say. I said to myself, they will find me, and I'm going to have to stay behind. He's around somewhere, I heard my father say from behind the car. Sure, go on. I'll find him, he could not be gone far. I'll go so. I heard my mother say. I got excited thinking I'm probably going to get away with it. I heard my mother walking to the door of the car and I hoped she would not look in the back, and I wondered was my father close to the car thinking he might look in if he was. My mother got to the driver's door and sat in. As she did, I was sure that my father was looking into the back of the car and he was going to catch me hiding. My mother had not closed the door and had been doing something within the front of the car. Start the car, start the car. I kept saying in my mind. I was anxious thinking about what the outcome was going to be. Chapter 10, Red Hot Poker. Anyone? 71. Then I heard my mother's door shut. I waited for her to start the car, saying to myself, I'm nearly there, hoping. My mother started the car. I got excited thinking I'm actually going to get away with it, but still thinking, where is my father? Is he gone away from the car or is he standing beside it? I heard the car go into gear and felt it move off. I felt a sigh of relief that I didn't get caught and I was on my way with my mother and away from my father. I decided to wait for my mother to get some distance up the road before letting her know that I was there, so it would be too late to turn back if this is what she had to do. She might bring me back as to not go against my father, knowing what he said about me being in the car and causing an accident. When I thought we were gone far enough, I came out from the back of the seat and appeared between the two front seats. My mother heard me and looked back quickly. She got a fright, saying, "What are you doing there?" while looking forward and concentrating on driving. Jesus! You gave me an awful fright, she said. I didn't say anything, I was just really happy to be in the car with my mother. Are you all right? She said to me. Yeah, I am, I replied. Okay. But you will have to sit back there in the back in case something happens and you go flying through the front window. I stayed in the back as my mother said. I wanted to be up the front with my mother, but anything was better than being left at home with my father. I sat there in the back feeling very happy, and after some time I went up between the two front seats and started to look out the front window. My mother said to me to hold on tight to one of the seats, and then she slowed the car down. I was happy my mother didn't tell me to go back into the back. She seemed happy that I was in such good form. All through the journey my mother would ask me, was I all right and was I holding on tight to the seat? My mother was always very caring and good to me. When we got to the city, I went with my mother and got the shopping. Afterwards, my mother said to me, we will go to the coffee shop and get tea and a bun before we go home. We went to the restaurant. My mother ordered a pot of tea in at the counter and told me to pick which bun I wanted. I picked my bun. Then we sat down, and after a while the waitress brought the tea and buns to our table. At first I was very happy with my mother asking me was I all right and did I want more tea. She was so nice to me. But after a while, thinking about what a good time I was having with my mother and that it would be great if it was like this all the time, I started to think that it would never be like this all the time, and I got sad thinking that when we have eaten our food and drank our tea we would be going home. I totally withdrew from my mother. I wasn't able to talk. I was so depressed at the thought of going home, and most of all home to my father. I kept hoping time would go slow, looking to my mother's food, hoping I would never see it finished and we could stay here forever. My mother had noticed I got down in myself and she looked sad. She knew what was going on in my mind. As I seen my mother's food disappear from her plate, I became very sad and anxious about going home. All I wanted was time to go slow, and I kept hoping this. Chapter 10, Red Hot Poker. Anyone? 72. To my delight, my mother took her time and filled up her cup again, but to my dismay she said to me that we would be going very soon, that we had to go home, we've been gone a long time. My mother finished her tea and we went to the car. I sat in the back all the way home feeling sad. The happiness felt very short-lived, and now it was time to go back to the evil that awaited at home, the evil that was my father. The next time my mother was going shopping, I tried to achieve the same feat and had hid again in the back of the car, only to be pulled out of it by my father shouting, "Look where he is again. Come out of there before you cause an accident." "Did you see where he was again?" he shouted to my mother. I started to try and get away from my father and get to the car. I was trying as hard as I could, but I couldn't get away. My father shouted to my mother to get in the car quickly and drive off, saying, "Hurry on quick. I'll hold him here." My mother did what was asked and drove off, with my father having a firm hold on me. I had tried this every time my mother had to go shopping, with the same result, my father catching me as I hid in the car and prevented me from going. I was stuck with my father every time after that, when my mother had gone to do the shopping, and my father continued to severely burn me while she was gone, and on her return he would say to my mother, "See what the fucking Edget did again, burned himself with the poker, and you can't do anything with him, he won't stay away from it." My mother was manipulated and believed my father that it was my own fault that I was getting burned. I couldn't tell my mother or anyone what was going on, as my father had conditioned me to this by always telling me that I had to do what he said and not tell, or he would kill me or my mother. As time went on, again I had been living two lives, playing with my brothers, going to friends' houses the weekends, being happy, and then finding myself in a nightmare with my father abusing me. But now I was very unhealthy, feeling very depressed from time to time, having nosebleeds all the time and getting sick from the poison that my father had still been putting into my body, and I started to feel severe pain in between my legs. I knew I had to try and just get on with things and not tell anyone about the pain between my legs, as I knew the awful pain was a result of the time my father spent punching and squeezing me with the pliers. It was very difficult to try and cope and get on with things while pretending I was fine, as every day that passed the pain got worse and worse. It became impossible to concentrate in school. I was leaving the classroom to get sick, and it was nearly impossible to get through the day with the pain between my legs. All I did was concentrate on the pain from second to second while feeling the sore bumps on my head. I felt very, very unhealthy, and it was affecting everything in school and at home. While my brothers played around the house, I lay in my bed in severe pain. I had come out from time to time as to not let anyone see what I was going through. Chapter 10, Red Hot Poker. Anyone? 73. I was withdrawn from everyone because of the pain. My mother had not noticed that I had to lie in bed during the day, as she was so busy with the housework and helping my father on the farm. Dean had come into my room from time to time asking me to come outside to play with me, telling him I was very tired and would be out in a while, and he had not noticed anything either. The violence from my father continued. I continued to be in pain, and I continued to not tell anyone about what I was going through. My health was at a serious low, and every day I struggled to get through. My mother had been still putting me to bed early to avoid the blows of the poker, but my father was still coming into my room later in the night, torturing me. I had been already being in a lot of pain during the days when my father entered my room shortly after my mother put me to bed. He done to me the usual, punched me in the stomach repeatedly and took the pliers from his pocket and tortured my private parts. The pain was excruciating. I was now 6 years and still very young, and I didn't want to go on any more and didn't care if my life ended, thinking I would probably be better off if I was dead. Chapter 11, Safe Outside and Freezing to Death. 74. Chapter 11, Safe Outside and Freezing to Death. Age, 5 to 6 years old, living my nights outside in the rain, winds, and bitter cold to keep from nightly being abused, suffering pain from past abuses. Following evening, my mother told me to go to bed, and I said to myself, I can't give up, and I'm not going to let my father torture me anymore. So I waited for one of my brothers to go to the toilet and went to my mother and told her that I was going out into the yard to go to the toilet because I could not hold it. She had no problem with this, and I told her that I would go straight to bed when I came back. I then went outside with the intention of staying out until it was very late and avoid the torture in my room, as my father would have by then been in bed asleep. When I got outside it was dark, and I went in the direction of my father's sheds. I went to the very back and located a place that I thought would be the least likely room in the sheds that my father would find me in if he noticed that I was gone from the house. I started to walk inside, but it was very dark and I could not see where I was going, and I wanted to get to the very back wall of the room to be furthest away as possible from being seen. I put my hands out in front of me and started to walk very slowly in the hope of finding the wall at the back. I was a bit scared that I was in the dark in the middle of the night, and although I could not see where I was going, I closed my eyes so I would not see if there was something bad or someone bad in the room. After a bit of a struggle with the dark and the feeling of being scared, my hands had touched the back wall. I turned and walked forward a few steps, and I got very scared and wanted to get out of there, saying to myself that my father is probably going to find me in here. So I made my way out, feeling relieved of the fear of the dark shed, and I decided to walk down the road to a place myself and Dean played on a flat piece of rock that had been just over the wall on the road I was walking. I thought I could lie down there and rest. Although it was dark, I could easily recognize the part of the wall that I had to climb to get onto the rock to rest, as myself and Dean had been there a lot during the day playing. Chapter 11, Safe Outside and Freezing to Death. 75. I recognized the part of the wall and started to climb. It didn't take me long to clear the wall as it was very low and I got onto the big flag of rock. I didn't know what I was going to do until I thought it would be clear to go home. I sat down on the rock and just started to look around in the dark. After a short time sitting there I got very bored wondering what I was going to do until I could go home. As time went on I became very uneasy just sitting there and thinking, how am I going to stick this until it's clear to go back to the house, knowing I was going to have to wait for hours into the night. I got off the rock and started to walk into the field and back again to the rock. I'd done this for some time before going back to sit on the rock and back to thinking, how am I going to stick this out? After some time I found myself off the rock and pacing up and down the field again. Time seemed to go so slow, and although I had no way of telling the time, I had decided just to wait a very long time before going back to ensure enough time had passed and my father would be long in bed asleep. From some time switching from sitting to pacing around the field I grew very tired and wondered had I spent enough time away from the house, and decided to wait a bit longer. In doing so I started to feel could not keep my eyes open, and after that wait, I again decided to wait another while to be sure. I decided I would keep walking, knowing that if I sat on the rock again I would probably fall asleep there. I struggled to keep my eyes open but did so and decided that enough time has passed and I could go back to the house. I got back onto the rock and onto the wall. I had very little energy left and found it hard climbing from the wall and onto the road, but after being as careful as I could and taking my time I got my feet on the road and started the walk back. On the way back, although very tired and out of energy, I felt safe at the thought of going into bed and not having my father enter the room doing bad things to me. Everything was so quiet on the walk up to the house, and when I was in view of the house I seen that all the lights were out and the house was in complete darkness. My mind rested seeing this, as I knew that I had stayed out long enough and everybody was in bed. My mother didn't notice that I had been out of the house, and most of all my father was asleep. I walked through the house quietly and into my bedroom, and again feeling tired I had woke a little with excitement that I could finally go to bed without all the horrible things happening to me, and I had forgotten all about how hard it was staying out in the dark. I was just really happy that I could go to bed feeling safe and took my clothes off and went to bed. I had got up for school in the morning on time, but in class I started to feel the effects of staying out late. I had been feeling unwell in school now for some time from the poisoning, sometimes getting sick on the floor in class where the teacher would have to clean it up after I got sick, and all day I would look to the wet patch on the floor where I got sick wondering, why doesn't anybody else in the class get sick, and feeling unwell from the Chapter 11, Safe Outside and Freezing to Death. 76. Physical abuse I was receiving from my father, and now I found myself not able to stay awake in class with my avoidance of the abuse from the night just gone. I had conquered the avoidance, but now I wasn't able to conquer the consequence of it. I kept putting my head down on the desk to rest, and although I lifted my head back up again very soon after, I had done it so many times that the teacher had noticed and had said to me, "You can't be sleeping in class, that we were here to learn." I tried my best to stay awake, but I struggled with this throughout the day, with the teacher on my case all day. The evening had come, and although I struggled really bad all day with the tiredness, my objective was to do the same again and stay out late to avoid the abuse. So while being in my room shortly after my mother told myself and my brothers to go to bed, I made my way to the sitting room, telling my mother that I had to go outside for the toilet. She had a suspicious face on, asking me why I was going outside to go to the toilet. "Philip is in the toilet and I can't wait, so I'm going outside," I said. "Come straight back in when you are finished and into bed," my mother said to me. I had the feeling that my mother might have known something about me being out the night before, so when I went outside I thought to myself, I'm going to have to go back in. How am I going to do it this time? I thought to myself. I was sure that my mother was keeping a close eye on me this time. I said, will I just disappear off down the road? Or will I go inside to show my mother that I came back in and then somehow get outside without her noticing? I then walked into the kitchen and turned around and back outside. I thought to myself, will I just go down the road and into the fields, because if I don't I'll be stuck in my room with the torture that awaited me. I decided to walk in and show myself to my mother with the hope of by then having thought of a way to get outside without my mother noticing. As I walked in and showed myself, nothing had come to mind and I was stuck without a plan on how to escape unnoticed from the house. I walked past my mother, who was sitting on the couch in the sitting room, and went into my room still without any idea how I was going to get out. I stalling in my room with the intention of not giving up on my quest for a way out of the house. After some time just standing there thinking, I became very eager to get out, knowing that my father could appear to me any minute. And I decided to go into the sitting room and see if my mother was there. I was hoping that she had moved to some other part of the house and I could just walk out the door without being seen. When I got to the sitting room, my mother had not moved and was sitting still on the couch. I became frustrated seeing her in the same position and in clear view of me as I made my way through the sitting room with no idea what I was going to do now, and I got nervous knowing my mother was going to question where I was going again. I had absolutely no idea what I was going to reply if she did. Chapter 11: Safe Outside and Freezing to Death. 77. Hoping she wouldn't ask, I had gotten halfway through the room when my mother said, "Where are you going now?" "Nowhere," I said to her, and a bit of a shocked look came on her face as I looked back at her and still walking forward. "Where are you going?" she said, sounding very eager as to what my answer was going to be. "Outside," I said, and my mother said, "Why?" really quickly as I was nearly beyond the perimeter of the room and stepping into the kitchen. "Now." "Why?" I said, and continued on in through the kitchen and outside to where I stalled there thinking, will I just keep going or will I go back, and knowing that my mother was suspicious of what I was doing and was keeping a close eye. My mind was very indecisive of what to do, and I knew I had to do something quick before my mother had come to understand what was going on. Thinking I didn't have much time, I reacted by starting to walk into the house, while on route to the sitting room I hoped that by now my mother would have moved away from. The sitting room. To my disappointment, she was still sitting there and looked content in doing so. I started to think I wasn't going to be able to follow through on my quest to get away and come away with the same outcome as the night before and avoid the abuse. I kept walking through the sitting room again, hoping that at some point my mother would not be there, but after some time doing this and my mother still in the same position, I decided to go back to my room and into bed, as I thought my mother had definitely known what I was up to and I didn't want to do anything that would make her worry. I would never do anything to worry my mother and stayed in my room, leaving myself open to being subjected to my father's treatment. And my father had taken advantage of me being in home that night, coming into my room and inflicted torture and pain onto me. The following evening came and it was the same routine. After dinner, myself and my brothers would do our homework and afterwards sit around hoping our father wouldn't kick off before being told it's time for bed by our mother. My father had kicked off that evening, giving me some blows to the head with the poker, but he had not followed me to the room, as he was now leaving it later to come into me and not letting my mother see what was going on. The blows to the head were not nice, but I just couldn't go through with what my father was doing to me in the room anymore, as now the pain between my legs even through the day was unbearable and I couldn't take further punishment to that area. So after the blows to my head from my father, my mother rushed us all to bed. I waited in my room and didn't undress. I waited for a short time until I heard the house settle down, and I just started to walk through the house quickly past my mother, who had said nothing, and out the back door without thinking anything at all. I had erased all thought from my head walking through the house just to get out, as I knew from the night before thinking about my mother sitting there worrying about me had kept me in the house. This had worked to get me out of the house, and I had thought while at the back of the house about what my mother might do and what way she would be if she was monitoring. Chapter 11: Safe Outside and Freezing to Death. 78. What was going on, and had noticed I was gone missing, but that wasn't stopping me. I was not staying in the house tonight one way or another and continued to walk off down the road. I had got myself to the part of the wall where I knew I had to get over to get onto my place of rest, climbed the wall and onto the flag of rock. I found myself in the same predicament as the night before, sitting there bored and feeling uneasy about time going so slow and not being able to sit still. So I started to pace up and down the field, taking short walks from the rock and stopping short of the nearby wall and back. And while doing so, I could identify the feelings I had with the ones of the night before. Stressed with the time going so slow and the length I had to stay in the field for. I had no idea of what else to do. There was nothing else, so I stayed pacing up and down, and while doing so I felt a large amount of light rain on the top of my head. It started to make a light drizzle at first, and I kept walking up and down thinking it wasn't that bad and it was going to stop very soon. After a bit of time while waiting it out, I got really worried that I was beginning to get fairly wet. And then the drizzle didn't cease like I thought it would. It got heavier and I started to really feel it in my clothes, and quickly moved into the wall and tried to get shelter by bending down and staying as tight to the wall as I could. The wall had been very low to the point where, while bent down as far as I could go, it was barely extending over my head, and I had been in between two wisps of trees that were giving no amount of shelter. I had still been getting wet as the drizzle was coming across the top of the wall and onto me. I looked around to see if I could spot a place that would provide me with more shelter, but nothing seemed to fit the description. I had spotted 2 locations that wouldn't provide shelter, but they looked like they might be a small bit better than the place I was in. I looked at one of the locations and contemplated for some time about making a run to it, but I kept saying to myself, I will probably get very wet en route, or will I stay here and try and live with the little protection I have? I justified this by saying I would get very wet getting there and it might not hold any more protection for me, and decided against it. Although deciding to stay where I was, I knew it was only a matter of time before I was soaked through, and I started to think, what more can I do? I knew I had to do something and thought of making my way to the sheds and get a plastic manure bag, and I could hold it over my head and stop the rain hitting me. But again, thinking I'm going to get very wet trying to get to the sheds, or I can wait it out here. I discussed this in my head and came to the conclusion that one way or another I was going to get wet, and thought it would be best to go to the shed and get the bag, thinking the rain might continue into the night. And I started to move, climbing the wall that I had been under and into the field that had the sheds in my view. As I walked through the field, I started to get very wet, and I began to get very depressed and angry at the situation I had been in, out late into the night getting wet trying to avoid my father's cruel, harsh treatment. During this state of depression and anger, I got a kick of happiness, and it popped in my head that I could just spend the night in the shed for shelter. I felt a great sense of relief. Chapter 11: Safe Outside and Freezing to Death. 79. Thinking, why didn't I just go there in the first place, and not have spent my time outside in the field? But I didn't live this happiness for long, as I thought to myself, if my father is looking for me, he will probably find me in the sheds. I went back into a depressed state again and got very frustrated at thinking, I'm going to have to wait it out in the field getting wet. All I can do now is get the bag and head into the field and use the bag to protect me from the rain, I said to myself, and continued on towards the sheds. As I walked past the back of the house, I thought maybe I could be seen if they had noticed I was gone and was up looking for me. I seen that there was no lights on and said to myself that they are all in bed, my mother, father, and brothers. I started to think about my brothers being in bed and not having to do what I was doing, saying to myself, this is not fair. I wish I was in bed like my brothers. Why me? Why me? I thought. Those thoughts disappeared quickly as I thought maybe my father is looking out of the kitchen with the lights off, and started to feel I was being watched, looking to the window but could not see if he had been there or not. But I was so fed up, I then said to myself, if he is there, he is there, what can I do? I need to get the bag from the shed. I got to the small gate that was the entry to the sheds from the field I was in, started to open the small gate and seen that the shed door had been closed. Seeing this made me very depressed, thinking I'm not going to be able to get my hands on a bag from the shed. I got through the gate and stood in front of the shed door wondering is there any way I could get in, but I quickly realized that I was never going to get it open, and as I stood there I was still feeling that maybe I was being watched by my father from the darkness inside the kitchen window. But I had to keep going and thought that I'll find a bag from the other side of the sheds where myself and my